This is really the time for Hong Kong people to make a decision, whether we want to move forward, whether we want to stand still.
Fanny Law warns against political reform deadlock. Hong Kong women involved in a deadly traffic accident down under. And Russian aid convoy raises tensions in eastern Ukraine.
Good evening. Not everyone is going to be happy, but we must move forward. That's the message from Fanny Law, a local deputy to the National People's Congress when it comes to political reform. Ronnie Samtani begins our coverage.
The National People's Congress Standing Committee is expected to come up with a framework for constitutional development at the end of the month. In an interview with TVB News today, local NPC deputy Fanny Law said no matter what the framework looks like, one step forward is always better than the status quo.
But ultimately, we have to accept political reality, I must say. I can expect some reactions from the radicals. You know, no public policy is not just the central government's policy, even any public policy. You can't please everybody. And I think this is really the time for Hong Kong people to make a decision, whether we want to move forward, whether we want to stand still.
During the political reform forums held in Shenzhen this week, Beijing officials repeatedly stressed that the nominating committee would reflect the views of the majority. Some suggest that means the nomination threshold for CE candidates will not be lower than 50%. That's raised concerns about the screening of hopefuls and the public not having a choice of candidates from across the political divide.
For our chief executive, speaking for myself, I care not whether he is a Democrat or so-called pro-establishment. In fighting for democracy, I think we need to go step by step and move forward.
Law also believes the majority of the people of Hong Kong want to achieve universal suffrage in a peaceful way. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
Meanwhile, Occupy Central organizer Benny Tai says he will press ahead with the proposed civil disobedience campaign if Beijing decides to limit the number of chief executive candidates. But he acknowledged Occupy Central will probably not change the central government's stance. Owen Fung has that story.
Benny Tai said today it would take a miracle for the central government to change its stance on political reform. He says Occupy Central will happen if the NPC Standing Committee moves to limit the number of CE candidates.
If the Standing Committee in the decision next week state clearly that the nominating committee will use the majority rule to decide the candidates, and also setting limits on the number of candidates, like 2 to 4. Now that will be two indicators. We will see that there will be no more chance for true universal suffrage.
Tai stressed that the discussion should now focus on what will happen after Occupy Central, noting that the movement will have minimal effect on the central government's stance. Tai believes this could change in the long term, depending on the response of moderates in Hong Kong and wider society. LegCo President Tang Yuk-sing doesn't believe Beijing will change its position despite the civil disobedience movement.
Never has anyone representing Beijing give anybody the impression that the central government is going to change their position because of Occupy Central.
Tang did point out that the NPC Standing Committee will further clarify details of political reform, such as what constitutes a broadly representative nominating committee. Still, lawmaker Fernando Cheung believes there could still be opportunities for Beijing and pan-democrats to communicate. Owen Fung, TVB News.
To other news now, 2 women from Hong Kong were involved in a fatal car accident in the Australian state of Queensland. They were injured in the crash that killed 2 Australian men. The 2 women, aged 28 and 30, were heading to work in the city of Bundaberg on Thursday morning. It is suspected that their car crossed double white lines to try to overtake a truck when it slammed into another car head-on. The The 2 men in that car were pronounced dead at the scene. The 2 Hong Kong women were taken to hospital with injuries that are not believed to be life-threatening. The Immigration Department has been in touch with their families and will provide assistance if necessary. In a separate tragedy, a car crash in California left 3 Japanese university students dead and 5 others injured. The car carrying the 8 students careened off the highway, went down an embankment, and struck a power pole. The force of that accident sheared the car in half and left power lines dangling. The crash happened north of San Diego. The 19-year-old male driver and 2 passengers were pronounced dead at the scene. The remaining passengers suffered moderate to major injuries. All were listed as new students about to attend Palomar College in San Marcos.
The United States has accused the crew of a Chinese fighter jet of conducting a dangerous intercept of an American surveillance plane in international airspace east of Hainan Island. The incident happened on Tuesday. It involved a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon anti-submarine and reconnaissance plane and a Chinese Su-27 fighter jet. The Pentagon says the Chinese jet made several passes at the P-8, crossing over and under it. At one point, the jet flew wingtip to wingtip about 10 meters from the Poseidon and then performed a barrel roll maneuver over the top of it. It's the 4th such incident since March.
We have registered our strong concerns to the Chinese about the unsafe and unprofessional intercept, which posed a risk to the safety and the well-being of the aircrew and was inconsistent with customary international law. Also, it undermines, and we've made this clear, that it undermines efforts to continue developing military-to-military relations with the Chinese military.
More than 200 Russian trucks that cross the border with Ukraine have returned to their home base. The convoy's presence on Ukrainian soil earlier drew widespread international condemnation and sharply escalated tensions between Moscow and Kiev. Alan Buknia reports.
The Kremlin says the trucks are on a humanitarian mission, carrying food, water, generators, and sleeping bags. They arrived in the pro-Russian rebel-held city of Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, where they were warmly greeted. This man said almost everyone has abandoned them, and he wouldn't know what they'd do without Russia's help. But the Ukrainian government hadn't yet given permission for the trucks to pass, saying only about 35 had been properly checked to ensure they were just carrying aid. Kiev added that because of the intense fighting in the region, the truck's security couldn't be guaranteed. A Ukrainian diplomat called the convoy a direct invasion of his country.
The fact that Russian trucks entered the territory of Ukraine without proper border and customs procedures, and that the cargo was not passed to the representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross, indicates deliberate and aggressive nature of Russia's actions.
The move was also widely criticized at the UN Security Council.
It has nothing to do with humanitarianism. That humanitarian effort is being coordinated by the United Nations, and if the Russian Federation wanted to participate in that, it could do so in a collective way rather than acting unilaterally.
The Russian ambassador said the aid was badly needed and blamed Ukraine for stalling the process.
Officers who have been sitting there since August 15 and then promising us that any day we can start moving. Now the Ukrainian forces started shelling Lugansk, as they did yesterday, very heavily, and they are telling us, no, you cannot go because the security situation is bad. This is absurd. We are talking about humanitarian assistance.
The United States has threatened stiffer sanctions because of the convoy. Alan Buknia, TVB News.
The U.S. has raised the possibility of a broader military campaign that targets Islamic State bases in Syria. An official made clear the campaign against the militant group would not be restricted by borders.
We are going to do what is necessary to protect Americans. And so if we see plotting against Americans, we see a threat to the United States emanating from anywhere, we stand ready to take action against that threat. We've made very clear time and again that if you come after Americans, we're going to come after you wherever you are. And that's what's going to guide our planning in the days to come.
The Obama administration has launched airstrikes targeting Islamic State militants in Iraq. But the U.S. has avoided direct military involvement in the civil war in Syria so far.
Staying in the region now, and Hamas militants in Gaza have executed 18 alleged spies who they said leaked information about locations of tunnels, rockets and military personnel to Israel. This comes after an Israeli airstrike killed 3 top Hamas military commanders. In Israel, security sources say a mortar bomb fired from Gaza killed a 4-year-old boy. He's the first Israeli child killed in the conflict. His death is bound to raise pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end rocket fire from Gaza, something Israel's military has been unable to do in 46 days of fighting. At the United Nations, Britain, France and Germany floated the idea of a Gaza monitoring system. It will be put in place to verify any future ceasefire reached between the Israelis and Palestinians and to prevent future conflicts.
In a sign that the Ebola outbreak is far from being remedied, leading health officials admit they're still struggling to contain the spread. But help is on the horizon. China has developed an Ebola detection kit that's just been approved for mass production.
As the number of Ebola cases climbs to over 2,600, with more than 1,400 deaths, the World Health Organization admits preventing its spread is a baffling challenge.
This is not something which is going to turn around overnight. It's not going to be easy. We expect several months of very hard work. We expect several months of really struggling against this outbreak.
With its 1.3 billion population, China can't afford to wait. So China's Academy of Military Medical Sciences and a Shenzhen biotech company jointly developed an Ebola detection test kit. Just approved for mass production, the kit quickly detects the Ebola virus so experts can quickly stop its spread. Health officials have just been informed the scope of the outbreak is worse than expected. Many families in West Africa are hiding infected family members. Despite positive reports of experimental drugs on a few infected health workers, the problem is it's not approved for the masses.
The thing with the ZMapp, it's exhausted. I mean, there is no more treatment, we were told, by the laboratory in the US.
Air France is one of few airlines running direct flights to West Africa. Even with its medical protection kits, many staff have refused to work and are circulating a petition to stop flying to affected regions. Ethiopia's national airline vowed to continue their flights despite the outbreak. But getting aid workers and Ebola medicine to those who need it most is now being hampered. Senegal, the humanitarian hub for aid workers, is banning all flights from the Ebola-hit countries, saying they must do so to ensure they stay Ebola-free.
And still ahead in our newscast, calls for greater support for ALS patients. Something's lost in translation for local minorities. And Atletico Madrid wins Spanish Super Cup.
Fankel, Less is More presents Skyfall. A covert operation.
This is gonna take a while.
With one way in.
What if they're being tortured right now?
Trust the system.
But no way out.
The system sent Warden Fitz in there to die. Let's hope they're as good as you think they are.
Monday, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at 10:40 on Pearl.
Join us and be part of this dazzling spectacle, the 26th Macau International Fireworks Display Contest, on September 8th